At her birthday party, she made a joke about upgrading, until her boss took it seriously. It was supposed to be a night about her. The restaurant was full of laughter, clinking glasses, and the smell of wine that cost more than the first car I ever owned. I'd spent weeks planning the evening, custom cake, private room, all her coworkers and friends. She wanted to feel seen, she'd said, so I gave her that. But halfway through the dinner, as the music got louder and the jokes got bolder, she decided to take her turn at the microphone. "Here's to another year of putting up with this guy," she said, pointing at me with that smug grin she wore when she wanted attention. "Maybe next year I'll trade up." The crowd burst into laughter. Even her boss laughed at first, but I didn't. I felt something tighten in my chest, not because of the joke itself, but because of how easily it came to her. Like she'd been waiting for that line, like she'd practiced it. I smiled faintly, pretending it didn't sting, but her eyes caught mine, and I saw it. The thrill of humiliating me in front of everyone. She wanted the reaction. She wanted to look like the bold, carefree wife who could say anything. I took a sip of my drink instead of responding. She rolled her eyes, muttered something about me being too sensitive, and went back to laughing with her friends. That's when I noticed her boss at the other end of the table, Mr. Henderson. 60, sharp suit, old school kind of authority. His expression had shifted, not amused anymore. I could see the gears turning in his head as he watched her mock me, laugh at me, and bask in the spotlight she thought she owned. When the laughter started to die down, I stood up quietly and gestured toward him. "Your turn, sir," I said, handing him the mic. She looked at me, puzzled, maybe expecting me to make a toast back. Mr. Henderson took the microphone, his tone calm but firm. "You know, Sarah," he began, "you've always been confident, maybe a bit too confident sometimes." The room went silent. Even the waiter stopped mid-step. She laughed nervously. "Oh, come on, it's just a joke." "I know," he said, "but here's one back. Consider this your last company dinner. You're fired." Her smile froze. I swear you could hear the sound of her glass clinking against the table as her hand trembled. The silence that followed was thick, like everyone was trying to figure out if it was still part of the joke. It wasn't. "You can pick up your things on Monday," he continued, then handed the mic back to me. I didn't say a word. I didn't gloat or smirk. I just placed it on the table, nodded politely, and started walking toward the exit. Behind me, I heard her voice, broken, panicked. "Wait, Mark!" But I didn't stop. There are moments when silence speaks louder than revenge. That was one of them. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I could still hear the murmurs inside, the disbelief, the awkward shifting of chairs. She'd wanted to be seen. Now she was seen for exactly who she'd become. If you've ever watched someone expose their own downfall while you stand in silence, you know it's not about satisfaction, it's about peace. That's all I wanted that night. Peace. And I finally got it. If you're still here listening, subscribe for more stories like this, because sometimes the quietest exits are the loudest statements. When I left that restaurant, I didn't slam the door or look back. I just kept walking until the city noise swallowed the last of the laughter behind me. My phone buzzed with messages, her friends, her mother, even one of her coworkers asking if it was true. I didn't answer any of them. I got into my car, sat there with the engine off, and stared at the reflection of the neon sign flickering on the windshield. It felt surreal, like I'd stepped out of my own life for a moment and was watching it crumble from the outside. I wasn't angry yet. Anger would come later. What I felt then was something colder. A strange, heavy calm that made everything sharper, quieter. She'd embarrassed me before. Small digs about money, about how I played it too safe. But this was different. This time she'd done it in front of everyone, like she needed an audience to prove she was above me. Maybe she thought I'd laugh it off again. Like always, I drove home slowly. No music, no thoughts, just the rhythm of the tires on the asphalt. When I got home, her things were everywhere. Her heels by the door, her perfume lingering in the air. I poured myself a drink and sat in the dark, thinking about how far we'd come from the people we used to be. There was a time she looked at me like I was her whole world. Now she looked at me like I was holding her back from one. I didn't sleep much that night. Around 3 a.m., I got up, grabbed my laptop, and started going through old photos. Birthdays, anniversaries, vacations. There was always that smile, the one she used when she knew a camera was on. I realized I hadn't seen the real one, the soft one, in years. The next morning my phone rang. It was her. I let it ring. Then again. I let that one ring too. A text followed. "We need to talk." I didn't answer. By noon, she showed up at the house. She looked wrecked, mascara smudged, hair pulled back like she hadn't slept. "You humiliated me," she said the second she walked in. That made me laugh. "You humiliated yourself," I replied, keeping my voice low. "You wanted attention, Sarah. You got it." She crossed her arms, defensive but trembling. "He overreacted. It was a joke, Mark. You could have said something." "Stopped him." "Stopped him?" I asked. "You think I control your boss? You fired yourself the moment you decided your husband was a punchline." She didn't have an answer. She just stood there, staring at the floor, twisting the bracelet I'd given her 3 anniversaries ago. "I'll fix it," she whispered. "I'll talk to him, I'll explain." "No," I said. "Don't. You don't fix something like that with words." I walked past her to the kitchen, poured a cup of coffee, and leaned against the counter while she followed me like a shadow. "Do you really think this ends our marriage?" she asked finally. "You made it end," I said. "You just didn't notice when." She looked like she wanted to cry but couldn't. "So what now?" she asked. "Now," I said, "you go home, wherever that is tonight." I didn't yell, didn't curse, didn't throw anything. She waited for a reaction, something she could grab onto, but there was nothing left to grab. I think that scared her more than anger would have. She left quietly, and for the first time in years, the house stayed silent. No perfume, no humming, no sound of her heels tapping the floor. Just quiet. The next few days, I started seeing how people really were. Her coworkers stopped reaching out. Her friends who'd laughed the loudest at her joke now avoided her. Even Mr. Henderson called me 2 days later, not to apologize, but to tell me I handled it with more dignity than most men would have. "You didn't need to say a word," he said. "The silence did the work." And he was right. I'd spent years trying to prove myself, to win back some version of her respect. But that night showed me the truth. Respect isn't something you ask for. It's something that's either there or it's not. I spent that week packing her things into boxes, one drawer at a time. Each object had a story. A sweater from our honeymoon, a framed picture from her first promotion, a lipstick stain on a wine glass. I didn't throw them away. I just put them neatly in the guest room. She called once more, then stopped. I guess she realized silence had become my language now. On Friday, I went back to that same restaurant, sat at the same table by myself. The waitress recognized me, hesitated, then said, "Rough week." I smiled. "You could say that." She nodded and walked away, and I sat there for a while, listening to the laughter from another table. Someone else's party, someone else's version of happiness. 2 days after she walked out of the house, she finally called again. I was at work, in the middle of sorting invoices, when my phone lit up with her name. I stared at it for a long second before answering. Her voice was smaller this time, almost trembling. "Mark, please, can we talk? Face to face." Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a cafe near her old office, the same place where she'd once made me wait for 45 minutes because she'd lost track of time. She came in wearing sunglasses, like she was trying to hide from the world. When she took them off, I saw the puffiness around her eyes. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said, hands wrapped around her coffee cup. "You know that, right?" I didn't reply. She sighed and went on. "Everything's falling apart. I can't get another job yet. Everyone's heard about what happened. Henderson won't give a reference. My parents think I embarrassed them. I need someone on my side." That last line made something click in my head. She didn't want me. She wanted safety, familiarity, a lifeline. I looked at her and realized she'd never apologized for the joke itself, for the way she treated me. It was all about her consequences, not her actions. I was always on your side, I said quietly, until you made me your punchline. She frowned, like she didn't understand why I couldn't just move on. It was a joke, Mark. Everyone makes jokes. Jokes have truth inside them, I said. Yours just slipped out in front of an audience. She looked down, stirring her untouched coffee. Do you still love me? She asked. I did, I said, and I probably still do in some way. But love without respect doesn't survive long. She nodded slowly, tears starting to form, but I didn't reach out this time. I just sat there and watched her fall apart quietly. There was a time when that would have broken me. Now it just felt inevitable. When we left the cafe, she tried to touch my arm. I stepped back. Take care of yourself, Sarah, I said. She wanted to say something else, but no words came out. That night I got another call, from Henderson again. She came to the office today, he said, begged for her job back. I told her no. Then she mentioned you, said you'd forgive her soon. I didn't know what to say, so I just said, she's wrong. He paused. You know, I've seen a lot of men fall apart after something like that, but you're not one of them. You handled it with grace. Grace. Funny word for something that felt more like exhaustion than virtue. The next morning I went for a long drive. No destination, just miles of open road and quiet. Somewhere along the highway, I realized I wasn't thinking about her anymore. I was thinking about myself, about how much of me had been wrapped around keeping her happy, how much I'd given up just to avoid her moods, her comments, her need to always be admired. I pulled over at a rest stop, got out, and just stood there, breathing in cold morning air. It hit me then. Freedom doesn't feel like fireworks or victory. It feels like silence. I stayed there for a while, watching the sun rise over the empty road, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. When I got home, I found a letter on the porch, her handwriting, shaky and uneven. I opened it. It wasn't an apology. It was a plea. She wrote about missing me, about the house feeling empty, about realizing too late what she'd lost. I folded it neatly, placed it in the same box with her things, and closed the lid. The next week I met with a lawyer. The process was quiet, almost mechanical. I didn't ask for anything beyond what was fair. When the papers were ready, I left them with her friend to deliver. No confrontations, no speeches. She signed them within 2 days. I guess even she knew there was nothing left to save. Months passed. I started running again, fixing small things around the house, talking to people I'd ignored for years. It's strange how life starts to fill itself in once you stop trying to fix what's already gone. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about that birthday dinner. The laughter, the lights, the way her face looked right before it all turned. But the memory doesn't hurt anymore. It just feels like watching a movie where you already know the ending. One evening, I went back to that restaurant again. The same table was empty. The hostess asked if I wanted it. I smiled. No, I said. I think I've had my share of celebrations here. Then I walked out, lighter than I'd felt in years, ready to start a new chapter in silence, the kind that doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. A few months went by, and life started to find its rhythm again. My mornings were quiet, predictable, coffee, a jog, a few minutes on the porch before work. I didn't think much about her anymore, not until I ran into one of her old coworkers at the grocery store. He hesitated when he saw me, then smiled awkwardly. Hey, Mark, how've you been? I shrugged. Better than expected. He nodded, shifting his weight like he wanted to say something but wasn't sure if he should. She's different now, quieter. Guess losing everything did that. I didn't respond. He went on, people still talk about that night. Half the office says it was the boldest thing they'd ever seen. The other half thinks it was the saddest. I smiled faintly. Maybe it was both. When I got home, I thought about what he said. For so long, I'd replayed that moment like a scar, something that marked the end of everything. But maybe it wasn't an ending at all. Maybe it was just the start of who I was supposed to be. That realization came slowly, like dawn breaking over fog. I stopped checking her social media, stopped wondering where she was. Every trace of her online life looked like a performance anyway. Smiles, filters, captions about growth and healing. But there was no truth in them. I knew that woman too well. One evening in late spring, I got a call from an unknown number. When I answered, there was a pause, then a voice I hadn't heard in months. "Hi, Mark." Her tone was soft, almost fragile. "I know I shouldn't be calling. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything." I didn't speak. I just listened. "You were good to me," she continued. "Better than I ever deserved." I thought I was missing excitement, but I was just running from myself. "You didn't deserve to be part of that." She started crying quietly, and for the first time I didn't feel anger or pity, just distance, like hearing an echo from a life I'd already left behind. "I forgive you," I said finally, not for her, but for me. She exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for months. "Thank you," she whispered. "That means more than you know." Then she hung up. No goodbye, no request to meet, just silence again. That night, I sat outside under the porch light, listening to the faint sound of crickets, and realized forgiveness isn't about letting someone back in. It's about letting them go without hate. A week later, I got an invitation in the mail. It was from Henderson's company. They were hosting a charity gala and wanted to honor donors who'd contributed over the years. I'd helped fund a scholarship program before everything went downhill. For a moment, I debated skipping it. But something in me wanted to go, not to prove anything, just to see how it felt to walk into that world again without the weight of her shadow. The night of the gala, I wore the same suit I'd worn to her birthday dinner. Not out of nostalgia, but to close the circle. When I arrived, the lights were warm, the air filled with polite laughter and clinking glasses. I greeted a few people, nodded to Henderson, who gave me a firm handshake. "Glad you came," he said. "You look at peace." "That's a good word for it," I replied. And then I saw her, across the room, standing near the bar, holding a glass of white wine. She looked almost the same, still beautiful, but something in her face had changed. The sharpness, the vanity, it was gone. She caught my eye, froze for a moment, then gave a small, uncertain smile. I nodded politely and turned back to the conversation I was in. I didn't go over, didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Later that evening, Henderson took the stage for a short speech. He talked about integrity, accountability, how people show their true character under pressure. At one point, his eyes drifted toward me for half a second, not in guilt, but in recognition. When the applause ended, I stepped outside for air. She followed, standing a few feet behind me. "You look good," she said quietly. "So do you," I answered, still facing the city lights. "I'm working again," she said. "Different field, smaller job, but it feels honest this time." I nodded. "That's good." There was a long pause. "Do you ever think about us?" she asked finally. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but not the way you think. I don't miss what we had. I miss who I thought you were." She bit her lip, nodded slowly, and whispered, "I deserved that." "It's not about deserving," I said. "It's about truth." She wiped a tear and smiled faintly. "You really did grow stronger from all this." "No," I said, turning to face her. "I just stopped giving people the power to define me." Then I walked away, not out of anger, not out of pride, but because the story had already ended, and I wasn't about to reread the last chapter. The weeks that followed felt like closing a long, heavy book. I went back to my routine, back to quiet mornings and simple days. Every trace of drama was gone from my life, replaced by stillness, the kind that used to feel empty but now felt earned. I kept seeing small reminders of how far I'd come. Her empty drawer, the unused wine glasses, the quiet ring of my phone that no longer brought tension. People at work noticed the change too. One of them said, "You look lighter." Maybe I did. When pain leaves, it takes a lot of weight with it. I started spending more time outdoors. Long drives with no destination, watching sunsets from parking lots, hiking trails I'd forgotten existed. There's something about walking alone through open space that makes you realize how small a betrayal really is compared to the world outside it. One afternoon, I found myself parked near the lake where we used to go years ago. It was quiet except for the water brushing against the rocks. I stood there for a long time, thinking about how strange it was that life could circle back to the same place but with an entirely different meaning. Back then, that spot had been ours, a place for promises and plans. Now it was just mine, but it didn't hurt. It felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I hadn't noticed I'd lost. That night, I wrote a letter. Not to send, not to post, just to clear the air inside me. I wrote everything I never said. How I'd loved her deeply, how her laughter used to be the best part of my day, how I forgave her not because she asked, but because I refused to carry her choices any longer. When I finished, I folded it and set it on the table. In the morning, I burned it. Watching the paper curl and turn to ash felt like releasing the last thread tying me to her. Months turned into a year. I rebuilt slowly. My home felt different, peaceful, alive. I learned how to cook more than eggs and toast, painted one of the rooms, adopted a dog from a shelter. His name's Cooper. He doesn't ask for explanations or apologies. He just sits beside me, silent but loyal, and somehow that's more honest than any words Sarah ever gave me. Every now and then, people would ask if I was seeing someone new. I'd smile and say, "Not yet." But truthfully, I wasn't in a hurry. Healing isn't about filling the empty space with someone else. It's about learning to be comfortable in it first. One evening, out of curiosity, I searched her name online. Her profile came up public as ever. She looked fine. Different job, new city, photos of brunches and sunsets with captions about new beginnings. I stared at one picture longer than I meant to. She was smiling, but I could tell it wasn't the same smile she used to have when things were real between us. I closed the tab. Some stories don't need sequels. They need endings. And I'd already found mine. The next morning, I got a call from Henderson again. He was retiring and wanted to hand over one of his projects to someone he trusted. "You're steady," he said. "You don't lose your head when people test you." That made me smile because once upon a time I did. I said yes. A few weeks later, I was standing at a podium, giving a small speech to his team, nothing fancy, just words about integrity and choices. And as I looked out at those faces, I realized something. The version of me that walked out of that birthday dinner had no idea he'd ever be standing here. That man thought the story ended in humiliation. But the truth is, it started there. Life's funny that way. It ends one chapter with a crack, then quietly begins another in the calm. After the event, I went home, poured myself a drink, and sat on the porch while the sun dipped low over the street. The world didn't owe me an apology, and I didn't owe it a grudge. For the first time in years, I was exactly where I needed to be. Sometimes the biggest victory isn't revenge or redemption. It's peace. The kind that doesn't need an audience, doesn't need a toast, doesn't even need to be spoken aloud. Just quiet understanding that you survived something that tried to break you, and you did it without losing who you are. If you've ever stood in that silence and felt the weight lift off your shoulders, then you know. You don't clap when the curtain falls, you just breathe. And that's enough. If you're still here listening, subscribe for more stories like this. Because sometimes, the quietest goodbyes leave the loudest echoes.